I recently lost my house, and Warhammer is to blame. Just kidding. But not really. I'm pretty sure that my landlord was a big Warhammer fan because as soon as he saw this green screen, I got evicted. So what's that tell you? And this means that technically I'm homeless, but I am lucky enough to be able to stay at my parents' house while I search for permanent shelter. And it's been weird, not gonna lie. For one, I'm doing this. I'm recording a video and sort of trying to keep my voice a little low so that they don't hear me and find out that I'm secretly a YouTuber. They don't really quite get it. It's a real job, Mom. I don't want to work in the potato mines. But for another, perhaps more relatable reason, I'm also hobbying. And the one thing that you realize whenever you lose your dedicated hobby space is just how much of it you need. There is a Lebensraum required for miniature wargaming. I think I'm going to take the kitchen, and if my dad doesn't say anything about it, I'm gonna take the living room too. And this all came starkly, terrifyingly to my attention whenever I was trying to decide which my miniatures would go into storage and which of them I would keep with me in the limited space that I now have. And let me tell you, it was a real Sophie's Choice moment. Take the Jean Steelers, I'll keep the Batman minis. And if your game of choice is an army-sized game like Warhammer, well, geez, I got a lot of sympathy. I did not realize how many miniatures I had for my Dark Eldar and for my Imperial Guard until I started to try and quantify space for them within boxes. Or the terrain, the amount of plastic Games Workshop terrain that I have accumulated over the years. Jeez. I have such a wide variety of plastic terrain from Games Workshop. I honestly feel like I could probably build a city out of this stuff. And do you know, that could be a video in the future. And this all made me realize that wargaming is space taking, guys. I think that was English. I know, huge revelation. But I don't think this gets appreciated quite enough in wargaming discourse. Gonna do my Dwight thing here. Fact, most people don't have a 6x4 table or the space to put down a 6x4 table. It's not a realistic gaming requirement, it's just not very accessible to most people. And I know, Warhammer doesn't use a 6x4 table anymore. It's like some nifty 66x40 or something, but you get the idea. That's not much smaller than a 6x4. Or at the very least, it's bigger than most kitchen tables. And look, here's the thing. We live in the midst of a housing crisis. There is a chronic shortage of homes right now. And the solution to this housing crisis seems to be more apartments, more small apartments, or even flats between floors. Seriously. Oh. And sure, if you live in the countryside, you have tons of spare room and can build a barn over the weekend with your uncles or whatever it is that people in the countryside do. I don't know, I've never been out there. Oh no, I think I've alienated like my entire country audience. But in a city like London, okay, get this, the average cost of a single square foot of space is £729. That means that a 6x4 table would cost something around, Jesus, £17,496. I did that straight off the top of my head. No calculator required. So what is the solution then for the average city-bound hobbyist? Those who don't have rooms big enough for tables big enough for wargaming? Well, of course, the solution is simple. Play at a local game store. But here's the thing, even local stores struggle with the size of space required for wargaming. For a lot of local stores, they have two profitable linchpins, Warhammer and the card game Magic the Gathering. And Warhammer requires a lot of space just to play it, a massive 6x4 table for two people. Magic the Gathering, however, for two people to play it only requires a small coffee table. Just enough space for two people to sit across from one another. It's tiny. And when you are a store, a physical space, well, one of the most important questions to ask yourself is, how will your space be allocated? How many paying customers can you fit in your store? You are playing a game of Tetris here, trying to make your space as efficient as possible, you know, in order to maximize revenue. And in this game of Tetris, success or failure determines, you know, whether or not you're gonna go hungry the next day. And this means that inevitably most stores cater towards card games like Magic the Gathering rather than war games, at least in terms of events. It just makes more sense that way. Obviously it depends on your local scene. This is going to be very different for lots of different stores, but generally speaking, you're going to want to support the most the system that allows you to get more people inside, more paying customers. Potentially paid, I mean often they don't pay, but they're contributing to a milieu and atmosphere, sometimes not a good atmosphere. Friday Night Magic, for example, has been a massive success in the local scenes to me because, well, they're big events. Obviously not so much over COVID, but now that things are starting to open up again. And this means that, generally speaking, overall, there are less and less spaces for wargamers to play at. Unless you want to play at a Warhammer store, in which case you'd best have 100% first-party models and be playing the most up-to-date version of the game, which isn't always the right option for a lot of wargamers. And this means that most local stores are incentivized to cater towards their card game players rather than their miniature wargamers. It's just a question of space. And this means that there are less and less places for wargamers to play at. Plus, not everyone has a local store, so it's not a total solution for a lot of people. And I've always sort of known this. I had to perform some impressive gymnastic feats in order to get past my wargaming table and into my kitchen in my little tiny flat before. But I don't think I ever quite appreciated it enough, at least not until I had put away my wargaming table and had to join the club of the not table havers. It's been a long week, guys. So what is the solution to this for local stores where space is at a premium, or for people like me who don't have a wargaming table or setup? It's funny, I get accused of being negative about Games Workshop a lot for views, but I'm not making a ton of money here, guys. I don't have a studio like some of those big Warhammer YouTubers, often who cover Warhammer with pretty positive coverage. I don't even have a house. Speaking of which, NordVPN have sponsored this video, and I'm gonna be honest, guys, my numbers are down, so I'd really appreciate if you would check them out. There is a link in the description of this video, and you will get access to the exclusive deal of a free month with their 2-year plan. And you know what a VPN is. It basically tricks the internet into thinking that you are someone else or somewhere else, and it is super useful. Personally, for myself, I use NordVPN in order to watch the American version of Netflix and Shudder while I'm painting, so I get access to things I'm not allowed. I find it super useful. Plus, there is the added threat protection. This is a great bonus. It prevents companies from taking predatory actions by tracking your search history and your cookies. Airlines, for example, if you have been looking up the prices of conventions or for hotels, then airlines will actually see that in your search history and they will increase the prices when you go to book a flight. So avoid that sort of nonsense with NordVPN. So I would appreciate if you would check out the link in the description of this video. There you'll get a free month with their 2-year plan. So check out the link. And well, one of the solutions to us, the spaceless, is that we need games that are smaller, ones that can fit within the small amount of space that we do have. So we need games that have a minimum amount of miniatures and a small table size requirement. So smaller games. And this, of course, led me down the path of the skirmish game. And I've talked about skirmish-sized gaming before on the channel. They're basically games that are smaller in size than, say, something like Warhammer. So instead of using an army, you're using like 10 to 15 miniatures. And I've been engaging in it really heavily since I moved in with my parents. And I'm gonna be honest, it's been a massive breath of fresh air. I think I've been enjoying my hobby more than I have in a long time. And really, this time spent like Napoleon in exile has given me a newfound appreciation for these smaller sized games. And I think I understand now why there was such a huge explosion in the amount of variety of skirmish games a couple of years back, and really an explosion that never really quite stopped, to be frank. We're still getting tons of new skirmish games. Like seriously, I don't think people appreciate how much variety there is out there. We truly live in a golden age right now of skirmish wargaming, and there's far more variety than I could ever lift off. I'll give you a couple of names here if you want to know more about them, just ask me in the comments. But just broadly in the sci-fi genre, we've got things like 5 Parsecs from Home, Stargrave, Fallout Wasteland Warfare, way more. In fantasy, there is Reign in Hell, Dragon Rampart, Frostgrave, Ragnarok. Then we got the superhero genre, so Marvel Crisis Protocol, Batman miniatures game, DC Universe miniatures game. And then there's alt history, so you get Wild West Exodus, Zona Alpha, Lunar, Silver Bayonet, Carnival, and way more. And then that's before we even touch on like the historical skirmish games out there. There's Saga, Lions Rampart, Mad Dogs with Guns, oh, and Blood and Plunder. And then there's other skirmish games that don't quite fit into any specific genre. You know, there's Don't Look Back, which is a horror skirmish game. So there is a real variety of content out there if you go looking for it, and I have just been... That's been me. With skirmish games, that's been me. I've been like a little piggy eating away at a buffet. And the games that I have settled on for the time being are Lunar from Blackside Studios, Carnival by TT Combat, and God Tier by Steamforged Games. And they are basically my hobby projects for the next couple of weeks. Lunar, for example, is a game about the Cold War getting hot in the 1970s or 1980s, right about that time. It's an alternate history game, but importantly, it's set on the moon. And you can play different nation states fighting on a 2x2 board, either the United States, the USSR, Republic of China, and more. And it fits comfortably on my mom's kitchen table, even if the terrain is a little bit improvised. And the maximum number of miniatures on each side is like 5, right? So like the game I played last night was 3 guys each. So it's really small, really easy to get on the table. It's not WYSIWYG or anything, so you can just build your little astronauts, your little cosmonauts to your heart's content. And these little astronauts, these little cosmonauts are super easy to paint. For the Americans, I just went for some Apothecary White, and for the Russians, it was just some Skeleton Horde. It was super easy to paint, a little bit of Mephiston red, just to add in some delightful highlights. You know, until you get to the American flag, the end boss of a Lunar. Seriously, this thing was so hard to paint. Everything else was so easy. It was easy street before this thing. Why couldn't it have just been the flag of Libya from the 1980s? Lovely and green. I guess it wouldn't have shown up on the green screen. It could be worse, I suppose. The flag could be that of Belize or something. Vaxology jokes. Nice. Lunar has a tiny footprint. It is absolutely perfect. I got miniatures painted in like a weekend, and they're a ton of fun to play with. Seriously, it's basically the game that I think Necromunda aspires to be. A lot of knocking people around on the low gravity, stealing their moon rocks, and running away. My favorite kind of minis game. Thievery. Can you tell that I'm Irish? Next up was Carnival by TT Combat, and I have seen this played, and I've even played a few games here and there, but I've never quite invested heavily into the system. At least until now. This is a slightly bigger game than Lunar in model count, so you're looking at around maybe up to 10 miniatures of this game at max. But in terms of the game size, it also takes place on a 2x2 mat. So this game is set in a fantastical alternative Venice in 1795. And the background is that the Pope, the corrupt Pope of the Catholic Church, has murdered the second coming of Jesus Christ. It's heavily implied that it was Jesus Christ anyway. And this has caused a huge magical cataclysm in Europe, and all sorts of crazy shit is going down. And so it's focused on Venice, one of the last ports that still stands in Europe, and there are a ton of different Venetian factions in the game. It's a fascinating set. And it was written by Gav Thorpe. Now I have the starter box, which comes with 2 gangs, the first of which is the Rashar, who are fish people from another dimension. And then there's also the Guild, who are like the OG mafia who control the docks, so you can see how these two will be at loggerheads. It's basically organized crime versus Cthulhu, and I'm really here for that. I'm a big fan of the setting. And the starter set is great actually. It came to around £65 and literally comes with everything you could possibly need to run the game. Rulebook, full gangs, and terrain. And all the terrain came pre-painted. It came with boards, the layout for the canals and things like that. It's really pretty and just perfect. And it all fits on the kitchen table. Love it. There's just no muss, no fuss, nothing to paint, obviously except for the miniatures. Now I haven't gotten to play with the gangs. I have painted one of them. I painted the Rashar. Next up is the Guild. And the Rashar were just painted with tons of turquoise. I love any excuse to get turquoise on miniatures. Mwah! I got them painted literally in a single day. They were easy enough to paint. paint. And I'm gonna paint up the guild next. I suspect they might take a little bit longer just because they got lots of fabrics and lots of, you know, bright colors and things like that. But we're gonna see. I expect to get them done in like a week or something. And finally, we have God tier as well. This one has been very interesting. It's very different from the rest of the games on this list. And full disclosure, I was sent out the starter sets for God tier by Steamforged Games because I am practicing how to play that game a little bit competitively. There is a creator clash happening next month with people like Kirioth, Pleasant Kenobi, and more, and I'm going to be playing against them in a tournament that will all be live streamed by Hellstorm Mikey, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward to losing, probably. No, I should go into this with more confidence, shouldn't I? I'll be honest, my practice games, I haven't been very good at this game, but the game is super interesting. It uses a hex grid. It feels a lot like a MOBA. You pick up the 3 champions, and they each come with their own followers, and they all have special abilities and like ultimate abilities and stuff. It's super interesting. It's a very strong competitive game, and I'm excited to really try and get the grips with it over the next couple of weeks. And I have a link in the description of this video if you want to check out more about the game, find out what it's about. The great thing about this game is that all the models come pre-assembled. The terrain is all on a board, so you don't really need to do a lot of hobbying around it. So it has been perfect for my current scenario. It's playable straight out of the box, and I do love that in a lot of war games. I think it's important to have war games like that. Sometimes you just need a hit. So yeah, that is how I've been adapting to my circumstances, like a little fungus. No Warhammer, no army-sized games for me for a while. And yeah, I've been enjoying it. I've actually really enjoyed looking at alternative systems. And you know, I have been appreciating the space that I do have, because here's the thing about that space. That chronic housing shortage that I mentioned earlier, it's not getting better anytime soon. In fact, it's getting worse. And we can expect space to become more and more premium as time goes on. And there are solutions to this problem for miniature wargaming. For example, my local store, the space that I play war games at locally, they aren't a traditional store. They're a non-profit organization. So not driven by the same incentives to prioritize Magic players over war gamers in their spaces. But even still, even though I can't go to areas like that for war games, I'm still being drawn to these micro skirmish sized games. Because I'll be honest, I like playing in my home. I like playing war games here rather than sort of out in public. I mean, people might find out that I'm a nerd. I've got some social credit to maintain here. And honestly, I feel like we should all be getting used to micro skirmish games becoming more and more of a bigger part of the hobby in years. I mean, obviously it's been happening already. Even Games Workshop have gotten onto the skirmish train with Warcry, Necromunda, Kill Team. But even outside of them, skirmish games just represent less of a risk for companies to invest in. There's less molds, less sculpts required, and honestly, the gameplay is really solid on a lot of these games. It's allowed for people to be far more imaginative, and I am so here for that. But of course, there will always be place for the spectacle of larger games, but I really do think micro games, they're the future. Evidently though, Games Workshop disagree with me because they were coming out with one of the largest games that they have ever done before, with hundreds of miniatures required and boxes and boxes filled with weapons. I guess that gives them plenty of stuff to sell, but big game, big problems, and I talk about that here. Check it out. And a big, huge thanks to Stephen Jackson and to Earthwormia. Thanks so much, and as always, a huge thanks to all my patrons, and I'll catch y'all next time. Bye-bye!